Okay, so hello everybody and welcome to the inaugural Class Fest, organised by the fantastic Natasha Carthew, and hopefully the beginning of many of them. So you're very welcome and thanks for coming to this. So we're going to meet some agents today, and I'm just going to give you a quick introduction to them. So at the end of the table is Juliet Pickering. She began her publishing life in Waterstones as a fiction buyer and bookseller and had no idea literary agents even existed. So having discovered they did, in 2003 she started at AP Watt as an assistant and became an agent, moving to Blake Friedman in 2013, becoming vice head of the book department in 2017 and director in 2020. Juliet is a champion of underrepresented writers, giving a voice to an experience not often reflected. She represents Natasha Carthew and Kerry Hudson, among others, and her authors have been shortlisted for the Booker and Costa, the Guardian First Book Award, and have won the Whitbread and the Green Carnation and the Prix Féminin Étranger. She's been a judge for the Bristol Short Story Prize and is on the board of the Working Class Writers Festival. So hello, Juliet.
Hello.
And in the middle, we've got Samuel Hodder, or Sam. Sam joined Blake Friedman in 2015 after graduating in psychology and taking a master's in publishing before several years working as an editor for psychological research. He's building his own list of authors in literary and contemporary fiction, historical fiction, crime and thrillers, and he loves novels that explore the loss of innocence, desire, deceit, class, or the world of work. So he represents Karen Powell, James Carhill and Ros Anderson, whose film rights have just been optioned by Margot Robbie's film company. And Sam has also been a judge for the Bath Short Story Award. So hello, Sam.
Hello.
And next to me is Julia Silk. Julia has over 20 years' experience in publishing, starting as a bookseller before working as an editor for 15 years, the most recent 9 of those for Orion. She became an agent in 2016, first with MBA, moving to Kingsford Campbell, now I think it's Charlie Campbell
Correct.
Associates, where she represents a wide range of fiction and non-fiction for clients including Rebecca Schiller, Heidi James and Liz Fraser. Julia grew up in London, part of a noisy Middle Eastern Jewish family, and loves stories that explore identity and belonging and books that shape and change the world. She's committed to increasing representation and accessibility for writers and regularly supports and contributes to organisations and events including Word Factory, Spread the Word, Bite the Book and the Working Class Writers Festival. She's a judge for the Bath Novel Award 2021. So welcome, Julia.
Thank you.
So one of the things that I know Juliet said, and it's one of the things I want to explore, is in my own experience, I took a long time to find an agent, so I have a submissions list more or less as long as my arm. And I know that agents used to terrify me, as they terrify so many of us. So I want to use this panel for one thing today, to really make agents more human. So, Julia, I'm going to start with you. In your words, as you tweeted, what the hell is a literary agent? What do you do?
Okay, so very kind of simply put, we're a champion for an author throughout the publishing industry and sometimes far beyond it. So we're the middleman between publisher and author. And what I love about being an agent is we're the very first person to read your book. So before it gets to a publisher, before it gets edited by an editor, I work with all my authors on editing their manuscripts if they're writing a novel, or their proposals if they're writing a non-fiction book. And so we are there to guide you through the entire process of being published. And the big difference between an agent and an editor is that an agent is hopefully there for your entire career, whereas an editor and a publisher, you might have several publishers, you might have several editors throughout your experience of being published. So your agent is really kind of the one person who will be by your side throughout, guiding you around the industry, making sure that your publisher is doing what they should be, and also, really advocating not just for your rights in terms of kind of business and your money and your advances and your royalties and all that kind of stuff, but also kind of advocating for energy and enthusiasm behind your book, for a great publicity campaign, all the kind of stuff that you really need to make a book successful. So yes, I think that sums it up, do you think? Yeah.
the broad territory of it for sure.
Brilliantly.
So, Julia, run us through a typical day. What in an agent's life
me?
is a
Sorry.
typical day?
We're going to get confused with Julia
Yeah,
and
Julia and
Juliet.
Juliet.
Yeah,
aren't
we are.
Well, one of the things I love about it is that it isn't really a typical day, but usually in any given day I might be working on an edit, speaking to authors at whatever stage they're at, whether it's having a little bit of a blip with the writing or asking me about something to do with their publisher. I mean, just to add to what Juliet said about what an agent does, sometimes in just one simple line, the reason why an agent is, why an author might want an agent is that an agent works for you and an editor works for the publisher. And at the end of the day, no matter how lovely and nurturing your editor is, they don't work for you, and your interests are paramount to your agent, but your editor has other sort of masters, put it that way. And so quite often what happens is, even with an author who has a good ongoing relationship with their editor, there are certain things they just don't want to breach sort of with them, and that they don't want to talk about with them, and that's another sort of huge part of my time. And I think I don't know if you found this, that even more so during the pandemic, where there's been so much less kind of contact that's possible, the actual contact that humanises the whole process has just not been as available. And I might be reading a contract, I might be pitching a book, I might be, gosh, what else?
Just never ending reels of
going out
tasks.
and about as well. A lot of what agents do is just, we do a lot of talking. We spend a lot of time kind of catching up with editors and talking to them, finding out what they're looking for and what they're publishing, so that when we are sort of talking to somebody about, if they're talking to us about wanting us to represent them or whatever, we can think, oh, I really like your book, and also I know who I would send it to you, because I know that they're looking for that kind of thing at the moment. It's such a relationships business.
Yeah.
So really people-centred. I mean, the one thing I've noticed over the years, and I noticed at a panel yesterday that was talking about publishing, is the word gatekeepers. So we always hear that. We always hear how agents are gatekeepers. And we're in a world where self-publishing and indie presses are on the rise. So Sam, perhaps you can tell us, why is it important for writers to have an agent? Why do we need an agent?
Well, I think, so agents don't like to figure themselves as gatekeepers, but it is a fact that a lot of publishers won't consider submissions unless they come from an agent. They say they're closed to unsolicited submissions. So it can be a prerequisite, to be published by many publishers. And then all the wonderful championing work, which Juliet touched on earlier. Your agent is there to look after your best interests, from placing your book with the right editor and right imprint, negotiating that offer, because when we see summaries of an offer in a newspaper article, it will say sold for X number of pounds, and then it'll just be like one line, sold for £100,000. But there's actually a lot more detail in an offer than that. Is that world rights? Is that all language rights? Is it just UK rights? Did that include audio? All kinds of things. What were the royalty rates? And so all those things, which if you're coming to the publication process as an author for the first time and haven't been trained in it, which is 99% of people, then you need an agent there. And often agencies will have been making agreements with those publishers for a long period of time. So they'll have what's called boilerplate agreements, where there's these hard-won victories in the contract negotiating process. So you won't be negatively impacted by what seems like a small detail, but can actually be crucial for your long-term income. So, for example, even the headline royalty rate, actually most books these days are sold at discount. So it's what the royalty rate is, when does the discount rate kick in, and what is that discount rate? These things are hugely important for your long-term income, which can be the difference between someone being able to dedicate themselves to writing full-time and not being able to do that. And so an agent can bring that expertise.
It's that financial. So you're there for the author's whole career. It's not just that you're there for just their writing. You're there to look after their business interest, to make sure that they're not being ripped off, and that everything is legally ticked. So if somebody has self-published, this comes up quite a lot. Is that something that agents will still look at to represent? That's a question I've heard a lot in the last couple of days. What happens if I've self-published? Does it mean an agent won't want to go near me. But I'm assuming that, given that there's some kind of business to be made, you would.
Yeah, so we, if it's a self-published, then there isn't a publishing agreement for us to negotiate and take commission on. So we don't handle self-publishing arrangements. But it certainly wouldn't put me off taking off from Karen Powell, for example, who was the second client I took on. She had self-published her 2 previous books and hadn't had the results in terms of reaching a readership that she hoped. So she wanted to pursue a traditional publishing model, and so that's what we did. It's not an obstacle in my mind. It's difficult if you're hoping to translate a book from being self-published to being traditionally published. You're going to have to take it down at some point. Like, the publisher's not going to pay you for what you've put up elsewhere.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
But a history of having self-published isn't.
Brilliant. That's a question I've heard a lot over the last couple of days. And
can I just add something to that? Sorry. I got an author called Sue Moorcroft who writes romantic fiction, and she's my hardest working author. She writes 2 novels a year, publishes 2 novels a year, kind of every Christmas and every summer. And she had a novel that was published by a tiny press. It was her first ever book. She's probably like 14 novels down the line now. And the tiny press had a 5-year license. It had gone out, the license had expired. She just published it herself on Amazon. So it was self-published. And then we were talking to her publisher, who are now kind of a few bits down the road with her, and they said, did she have any like backlist titles, which is like titles previously published, not by them? And we were thinking about it, and Sue was like, well, I've got this one novel called Uphill All the Way, and they bought it, not for very much money, but it sold 15,000 copies this summer. It was published in August, and that is huge. And so, even if that self-published novel isn't something we can pick up immediately and we're picking you up for something new, there might well be opportunities for those books further down the line. So it's never a deterrent at all. I think it's always like, it's great to know that you've got that under your belt, and maybe we can come back to that at some point.
Yeah, I've had similar, just in the middle of doing a similar type of deal for a backlist that has a very similar kind of genesis as that.
You never know.
Yeah.
I think it kind of feeds into this idea that, and it isn't just an idea, it is a reality. It is notoriously hard to get an agent. We know that the numbers of people that submit are massive, and I gather throughout the pandemic that's just got worse. Yeah. So, I mean, how many submissions do you get on average a week or a month, and how do you, how many of those do you choose? Do you sort of take?
Oh, there's the maths to this is so dispiriting, guys. I'm really sorry. I probably get 6 to 10 submissions a day. And how many authors I take on, there is no hard and fast rule to it. If I read it and I love it, I will make space for it, basically. But because looking at agents from the outside, you might think, oh my God, they represent 50 writers, which would be about my list. And you might think, God, how am I going to get a look in there? Well, of those 50 authors, probably only about 15 are active at any one time, maybe. Some of them will be cookbook authors, because I represent such a broad range. And so cookery is much more straightforward. We'll sell the proposal, then they'll kind of head off with their editor and start delivering recipes. I don't need to do that much there. Whereas on a novel or some kind of short stories or fiction, I might be a little bit more involved. But the role of the agent is really to make your work the best it can be before it gets to a publisher, and then the publisher picks up in that respect and takes over on the edits. And so what you're doing is you're kind of taking a little bit of a step back and just watching the process and making sure that your author's being looked after, that they've got a sense of the timings on everything, that they know when they need to be around for publicity, all that stuff. So I think although it looks very busy and intimidating in terms of what we've already got on our plates from the outside, we will make it clear if we're open for submissions. And I will read every single submission that comes into me. I cannot physically respond to everything because I've got to spend my 9 to 5 Monday to Friday on my authors who I work with already, and in chatting to my colleagues about what we have going on, and talking to my translation rights team about selling our books overseas and that kind of thing. So from the outside it can look utterly overwhelming, but the good books will always break through. And the other thing to say is that we're all got our own personal tastes, and we try to be as explicit about those as possible and as open, so that you're sending your book to the right person. But sometimes it might just be like, this is not for me because it's just not for me, and I'm not going to be the best agent for it. So it sounds like a cold reason, but it's genuine. as well. You
And
know,
sometimes it's because you've just got something that is really kind of, that feels too similar, and that you don't want to spread yourself too thin. And also why I think it's really important to talk about, because the whole idea of gatekeeping is like, you're out there, we're in here. It's a kind of very like us and them sort of feeling. But what I would always say, and I totally agree with Juliet, that, you know, that the good stuff will, the stuff that is exciting, and you know, if you've been working really hard and you've written several drafts and you have been working at it, and you know, you will probably get there eventually. It's just, some people look like they had an overnight success, and actually it's their third novel that they've sent out to agents, and this novel they've actually been working on for 5 years, and then it all looks like it's happened very quickly, but it's not necessarily the case. And also the idea of this whole gatekeeping and this sort of power balance that is very unbalanced. You know, I think, and I'm sure you find the same thing, when you do something does land in your inbox and you feel really excited about it, you know, we're there worrying about being rejected ourselves. You know, if we're really excited about something, you can pretty much guarantee that 5 or 6 other agents are going to be there asking this author if they, you know, trying to sell themselves to this author for representation, and we get rejected and turned down a lot, all the time.
and by editors as well as
and editors as well, who
Inevitably.
might lose out on something because 5 other editors wanted it, and there was an auction, and it's so much a two-way street, and I know that it doesn't feel like that, and I'm not saying that it's necessarily entirely equal, because there are more authors than there are agents, so obviously it would not be true to say that there isn't a certain element of imbalance, but it's not entirely one-sided. It absolutely is a two-way street.
And it does strike me, the more I speak to agents and the more kind of events like this I go to, you know, they are people who ultimately are passionate readers. You know, they love writing, they love finding new writing, they love finding a new voice. You know, so there seems to be something, because your background, and I know Juliet's background, and I think yours as well, Sam, it's not a straight, I went to apply to be an assistant. You know, you did something that was to do with the love of books first, and I know that you moved, didn't you, from being an editor as well?
Yeah, and in fact, my whole sort of trajectory, the first 8 or 9 years of my career, I desperately wanted to be a commissioning editor in a big publisher, and I spent years working in academic publishing, freelance, for bigger publishing houses, working for really small publishing houses. It took me 9 years to get into a big publisher, and even at that point, it wasn't necessarily the job I wanted. It was all I just chipped away at it for 18 years. And then when I finally got the job I really wanted, which was this one, I kind of gave it to myself, because nobody hired me to do it. I was very lucky in that I was ready to move on. My position was made redundant. I got this chunk of money, which meant that I could start a list from absolutely nothing. And if you're starting a list from absolutely nothing and you're not salaried, you don't really make any money for the first couple of years, literally almost nothing. And yes, I was hugely kind of lucky in that because I've been at Orion for 9 years, that chunk of money that they gave me to to leave enabled me to do this. But it was absolutely not, here, have a nice job as an assistant editor, or as an assistant to an agent, and then you become an agent with a kind of few authors that you've been kind of handed over. So I feel very much a kind of a sort of affinity with when I see authors working for years and years and years and feeling like they're getting nowhere and wanting so much to get in and feeling on the outside, because I felt like that for so many years, and but it was the only thing I wanted. So what was the point in giving up? Because
I think that's
there wasn't anything else I wanted to do.
Right.
So I just felt like I might as well carry on doing this.
And I think that's it for writers. I think it's really good for us to know that agents are people. They are human. You know, they're not these things that we can build up in our head that are just kind of there to reject our work. You know,
and it's not a glamorous life, guys. I'm not going to lie. I spent the entire week with my toddler at home trying to get his fingers off my laptop and smear the jam and stuff. It's just not some kind of exclusive industry where it's non-stop lunches and stuff. I know that's still a bit of a myth, and there is a lot of kind of meeting people and chatting over lunch and that kind of thing, but we are genuinely just trying to keep it all together like everyone.
That's such a lovely kind of, I mean, it really does help that. I mean, it's, the slush pile. I've used the word gatekeepers. I'm now going to use the 3 words that drill dread into you when you're writing. And that's this idea of a slush pile that you're going. And I literally used to see it in my head as some sort of mushy pit, in which if your stuff didn't get read, it got pulped, and I think it's something that we're terrified of as authors, because we hear and we read all these statistics, and we look at it and we go, well, who reads it? Who? There's no way an agent can be reading all of this. So who does read the slush pile?
It is us.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's us. Things come straight into our inboxes.
Submissions.
Yeah.
I call it a submissions inbox, not
I
a slush
like
pile.
that.
No, we don't say
and
slush
I'm sure
pile.
nobody calls it a slush pile
We
anymore.
talk about unsolicited submissions.
Unsolicited
Yeah.
submissions.
But other people do call it a slush pile.
They do. It's what it's
I
kind of
mean,
known as.
it's rude though, isn't it?
I think it's rude.
It's just rude.
And what makes one leap out? I mean, I work as an editor as well for Jericho Writers Assessing Manuscripts, and it's very apparent when something has. So, what for you as an agent makes that submission that you're going to go, oh wow, what is it? What's in there?
So sometimes I have a sense of what I'm looking for. So so a couple of months ago, I was like, I really want a really passionate, romantic, gay historical love story, and so I knew this was in my mind, and so I was scanning submissions as they came in, and then one came, and then I kind of instantly fell for it, and so that felt very serendipitous, and that in terms of talking about persevering, Rue Baldry, she had been applying to agents for 3 years and had been rejected by over 70, and now she's we're on our way to submitting her book, and.
So reassuring, isn't it? And Juliet, what leaps out for you? What really makes a submission sing for you?
So I think the cover letter does half the work for me. So when you submit to an agent, you're usually submitting kind of your cover letter, which is about a page, your synopsis, which again is about a page, 250 words-ish, and then your first 3 chapters. Or if you're writing non-fiction, you might be submitting a proposal. And for me, I mean, the cover letters I remember. So funny enough, one of them was by Imogen Hermes-Gower, who wrote The Mermaid and Mrs. Hancock, who was at this festival yesterday. And her cover letter, historical and mermaids just are not my thing at all. And I read her cover letter and I was like, there's just something about this that's so interesting. She was really concise, she was really direct, she was like, here's my book, your cover letter should be all about your book, less about you. And I think that's where a lot of people get a bit confused as well. And it should just be about the story. It shouldn't be about what we should be feeling when we're reading your book or the themes. We can work all that out later, don't worry about it. So a great blurb, as if it's kind of on the back of a book jacket, should sit right in the middle of your cover letter. And if you've got something intriguing there, that does half the job, definitely. And then also just being really smart about why you're writing to that particular agent. So when you go out and start looking for agents, there are obviously places like social media. There's the Writers and Artists Handbook, which is a brilliant resource. Is it yearbook or handbook? I can never remember. And you can go through there and see what people represent, and then go on agency websites and check out their profiles. So we all have pages on our agency website saying, here's what we love, here's what we don't represent. And so knowing that someone has gone and looked at that and then is writing to me and saying, I know you love, Elizabeth Strout, my novel might sit alongside hers kind of thing. That goes a really long way too. But then every now and then you also get an amazing pitch, and I don't think they're very easy to do, so I'm not kind of envying you the challenge of that. But one of the pitches I'll never forget is Bridget Jones. She came from Downton Abbey. I was like, right, know what that is straight off, really interested, sounds really fun. That immediately piqued my interest. So I think in that cover letter, of course, be professional, but make it clear what your story's about and how it might be a little bit different from everything else that is out there already.
And how do you stand, Julia, I'll ask you this, but the other thing that I've seen so many times at all these events is synopsis. Everybody hates writing a synopsis.
Oh yeah, they're horrible.
And a lot of
Horrible to
agents
write.
don't like reading them. Some do, some don't, How important is the synopsis? I think I see more angst about that than I probably do anything.
Well, this is what I do. If I see a cover letter that really appeals to me for all of the reasons that Juliet, and what I would say is I'm really quite surprised by how few people say anything about why they think why they're submitting to me. Which I mean, it's not like I want them to tell me how great I am. I mean, that's nice too, obviously. But I'm quite surprised how few people do that. I mean, it's maybe like 1 in 5 or 6 maximum. I don't know if you find that.
It's very obvious when someone's just pressed send all.
Yeah, yeah, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with and you know when it's absolutely fine to do multiple submissions. In fact, you should. Otherwise, you're going to be dead before anybody actually gets back to you. But anyway, sorry, what was the question? Oh yes, a synopsis.
Yeah.
So what I do is most agents with fiction want to see a cover letter synopsis in the first 3 chapters. So if the cover letter appeals to me, I don't look at the synopsis until I read the first 3 chapters, and then if I'm sort of a bit on the fence, or I think it's a really clever idea but I'm not sure if they can pull it off, and I don't actually want to ask for the full manuscript because I worry then that I'm going to end up sort of sitting on it for a while, or I'm going to raise hopes that I won't be able to fulfill, I'll kind of read the synopsis at that point to see if I think that the payoff is going to be something that works. I don't always do that though with crime and thriller because I worry that I'm really going to spoil it.
Really?
I worry that I'm just that the reading experience and finding out the hook and the twist and whatever is too important to spoil it with the synopsis, and that because I know I won't get the right reading experience. But if I really love the first 3 chapters of something, basically what I'm trying to say is I try to avoid reading the synopsis if I possibly can, because I don't want to spoil the reading experience. I want to know what the experience is going to be for whoever I'm going to be sending it to and for the end reader. But the synopsis, it doesn't have to be a work of art. Great if you can make it a really good read. There's a couple of pieces of advice that I would give for the synopsis. You do need the whole story arc. I mean, I've heard a few agents say they don't want spoilers, but I think most people do, because you need to know what the full story arc is. What you don't need is all the subplots and all the characters, because the human brain can only take on so much in one go. So if you've got a huge cast of characters and you can do that really well, then brilliant, and all credit to you. But if you're telling me giving me all those 18 names in the synopsis, I'm going to be lost by halfway through the second paragraph. So maybe pick 4 or 5, maximum of 6 character names. Don't include more than that, I think, is what I prefer, certainly. And then you don't need all the subplots. You just need the central thread and just an idea of if there is some complexity and there are important subplots that play into the main narrative arc, then include those. That's what I would generally say.
Yeah, I think it is one of those things that you really have to research your agent, don't you, to really find out who you're applying to and what they're saying. But I want to move on a bit now because it is a working class festival. So one of the things that we all know is that 80% of this industry is still vastly white and middle class. And one of the problems I think, or I know for working class writers, is that, I think Kerry Hudson said it, that if you can't see it, how can you be it? And this is one of Kit Duvall's, I did the common people thing. So one of her things is, where are the working class writers? Why aren't we seeing them? And we often hear or read that maybe an agent has rejected something that they've said it's too risky, or it's got too defined a sense of place, or it won't have enough appeal. You know, we get that kind of misery porn label.
I hate that label
so
much.
I hate that label completely. My question is, can working class writers feel with things that are changing, with things like this festival, with Common People, Know Your Place, can they feel confident that their submissions will be considered?
Yes. So, I mean, when a submission lands, you've got no idea who the person is behind it to start with anyway. No idea of age, no idea of race, no idea of, your class, unless that's made explicit in the letter for it being particularly relevant to the story, maybe. And I completely respect your right to say that in the letter if you want to, and if you want to assert that. But also, I want to primarily read the book. I don't actually care that much about who the author is until I've read it. And then I care. I care a lot more, and I want to know much more about them and what made them write this story and where this story comes from. But, I get it. Like, it's really hard. You look at an industry that is full of people who won't understand your experience and might not be able to empathise. But all I can say is that agents, certainly like all of us, do our best to put your book into the hands of an editor who does understand and who does get it, and a publicity team who are going to promote the book to the people who you want to read it. And that was so important with Kerry and Lowbourne. When we were talking about that book at the very early stages, I was like, show us a campaign that means you're getting this book into the hands of the people who it's about. I don't give a shit about, excuse my language, Waterstones or Guardian readers or whatever. We need to see how you're going to, and they were like, okay, so they went libraries, they went reading agency, they went charities. You know, how are you going to make this book free and accessible, basically? And accessibility is huge.
Oh, wow.
It's so important, and I think every single one of the books I represent should be accessible to whoever wants to read it. And so you have to keep pushing and making that point when you send out, you know, books to editors and publishers as well. But yeah, it can look very, well, it is very privileged and exclusive as an industry, but I think that is changing genuinely.
I think so. I mean, it strikes me as well that one of the biggest issues for working class writers, certainly for me, for the common people that I've spoken to, you know, for that kind of tribe of us, is confidence and imposter syndrome. You know, and I think Kit Devan made the point that so many of us are so busy fighting for, you know, we work hard, we're fighting to pay bills, we're fighting, you know, crappy schools or whatever, we're fighting our own confidence issues, and then we're having to negotiate this publishing world that doesn't seem to publish much outside of its own reflection.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think a friend of mine from Common People, Julie Noble, put it that you feel as a working class writer quite often that you're on a ski slope with other people and you're learning how to tie your boots and all the other people are just whooshing down the slopes.
I think there's this idea generally as well about publishing that there's some sort of secret that, I mean, I felt like that. And look, I'm not going to lie, I'm a middle class, you know, I'm a white middle class woman who grew up in North London, and I went to private school, but my mother was a teacher, my father was a pharmacist. I did know no one, and it wasn't the kind of private school where you get all these contacts because everybody's from somewhere important, and actually they weren't. And like I said, I really felt like I had to kind of just chip away at it for many, many years. But actually the question about working class writers and what Juliet said is, like, you know, you don't know when someone lands in your inbox. Obviously with something like Lowbourne, it's specifically thematically, you know, addressing a lot of different things about, you know, growing up and about a kind of life. But when Natasha said to me, oh, tell me about your writers and your, you know, who are your kind of working class writers, actually it was only when I was on the way here and I was like, oh yeah, and I thought about 2 or 3 other people, because they're just writing novels, they're writing fiction. They're great books that I really like, and they're authors that I've known and worked with for quite a long time. And I'm like, oh yeah, actually they are all working class. I'd kind of forgotten that. And actually Tanya Shadrick in the Nature panel yesterday was talking about something really interesting, and the idea of how she was extremely bright and extremely well educated, and because she was so clever she ended up getting the job that she got, and then she felt like somehow she'd been sort of educated beyond the environment that she was comfortable in, and it took her 20 years to kind of get her head around that and come to terms with that. Am I sort of representing that right?
Yeah, that's exactly what she was saying.
And
totally.
I've got, you know, working class writers on my list who are university lecturers and who, you know, and who live in big houses and are very comfortably off, and they don't feel any different about publishing and the experience that they have than if they still lived in the same circumstances that they did when they were growing up. So there's a whole lot of layers upon layers. It isn't just about, I'm a working class writer writing about working class themes. How do I get in? Does anyone want to hear my voice? Will anyone listen to me? Because it depends on, there are so many different aspects and sort of variables to this. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does. I mean, I think it's you know, we need working class writers to have more confidence to approach agents, so things like this are great. And once you've got the confidence to put yourself forward as the working class writer submitting, how can you give yourself the best chance? I mean, how many agents should you be submitting to in one go, Sam, would you say?
I probably wouldn't think of it in terms of a number, although, as Julia said, don't ever just do 1 or 2 at a time because of the work
You
can
will
wait
be
a long
dead by the time they get back to you.
Yeah, as Juliet said, I think do your research, look at the other authors that the agent represents, look at what they say about themselves on their agent's page, if they've given interviews, if they've given talks like this, because it will say, in the same way that agents research editors, you know, when I'm making a submission list, I don't think I'd like to go to 20 editors. I'm like, which editors do I really think I could stand a decent chance of being interested in this book? And so I think, it might seem a bit daunting, but get online and find out as much about agents as you can, and see who you think would be the right fit for your book, and then go for them all at the same time as well, to give the agents, a good chance of reading it because you can get interest really quickly.
You can, and I've noticed in my own experience that there's actually, and people don't really talk about that, we talk about rejections, but we don't talk about what there is to learn from those. And quite often, I think, I learn over the years of submitting that maybe it's better to submit to maybe 8 or 10 or something in the first go, and then whatever comes back to you, you have to get over the rejection bit of it, but you can look at what you can learn. So if they're all saying the same thing, they're all saying this voice doesn't work, or I've got issues with the plot or the setting or whatever, you then have a chance, don't you, to change it. Whereas I've known other writers who sent out to 30 and then that's it. You can't just suddenly start sending out again.
I think 10 at once is a good idea. You can have your A list, and also, I don't know, because I'm not a writer, but I would think that just sending out every few weeks, so it's constantly out there and moving, but also you're not getting all the rejections in at the same time. It's an ongoing process.
But you give yourself a little bit of time if everybody, and actually if you're hearing from agents and they are coming back to you and saying, I kind of really liked this, but that didn't quite work for me. And if the that didn't quite work for me is similar, it actually gives you an opportunity to do some revisions before you send out maybe to the next 10. So, it can be a really useful process, and you should be totally heartened by hearing from people who are actually giving you something specific to go on, because that really does give you something to do, to actually work
I'd actually back that completely, because I think there is a positive rejection, isn't there, as much as there's a negative. The negative is the generic, and I actually had one once that said, "Dear Johnny," another one that said, "Dear Jeremy," and I got somebody else's rejection sent to me once, quite interesting. So I think if you get one from an agent, and that they've taken the time to give you feedback and to give you input, you should frame it and put it on your wall. Seriously, it's a brilliant rejection to have. So I'm going to hit you now, Juliet, with this phrase I heard yesterday that just made the two agents on the panel just want to crawl under the table. Agents are only in it for the money.
Oh, goodness.
Oh, God. Because I'm so rich and I'm living the high life. No, I mean, of course, that's how we work. We work on a commission basis, and there's if you're looking at agents and you're not sure about what to anticipate from them, there's an association of authors agents which will give you the basics of what you should expect from every agent, but it's a 15% commission on all UK-based deals and 20% on overseas and media as a general rule. So we need to sit down with the manuscript or the book in front of us when you send it to us. We need to take you through the editorial process, which often is a year, maybe up to a year, maybe even longer, depending on that author's kind of working hours and what they can fit in writing-wise in that year. And then, for that entire time, we're unpaid. So we're doing it because we really think there's something exciting about this book, and we do see that there's going to be a publisher for it in the UK, but also we represent our authors in the US, so we would send it out there, we send it out around the world. So we're putting in all that work up front in the hope that we then can sell it. But we might sell that book from anywhere between £500 to like £500,000. And like 90% of the book's going to be on the smaller end of the scale. So, and then we're getting 15% of that, and your advances are paid in 4 instalments usually over a period of perhaps two plus years. So, my first advice to authors is don't give up the day job. And my own advice to myself is just keep working hard on this, because, you hope that you're going to get that deal for the author, but there's no guarantees. And I have had authors for whom So there was a couple of authors on my list with non-fiction projects. One was a cookbook, Burmese cookbook, and one was a memoir about adopting in the UK and what it was to go through the process. And at the time I sent out those proposals, publishers were like, oh, no one really knows what Burmese food is. Like, there's no room for cookbooks that we don't understand the food kind of thing. And I was like, okay, I'm going to sit on this and just wait. And then same with the adoption thing, they were like, oh, you know, at the moment we just want the misery memoir, or we want the practical guide, and there's no place for a very honest, ultimately quite encouraging book about adopting. And you sit on it as an agent and you wait, and then I sold both of those books up to 8 years later.
Wow.
And, you know,
Yeah.
I don't get anything in that time
No,
for
you
it.
don't.
So I'm not trying to make myself sound overly humble here, but we are doing all that work up front with the potential of selling a book, but we've got no clue when we take it on really how much it's likely to earn us. And that money will come in as 15% of a quarter of your advance over 2 years. It's not a big money maker at all.
It's about kind of how much work. It's like you just have to keep working.
Yeah.
It's about how much work you do. It's about, I mean, sometimes as well you'll sell something for a small advance, maybe £3,000 or £4,000 or something, and then actually you sell a lot of foreign rights on it, and that's how everybody, the author and you, make your money, and that's how it can work as well. But Juliet, you know, it's a really important thing that Juliet's raised about how, you know, I always say, you know, every part of the process is not it's not an end, it's a beginning. You get an agent, and that's not, you haven't made it, you haven't done it, that's not the end.
Yeah,
That's
I
just
wish,
the beginning.
yeah.
Yeah, that's the beginning, and then you get your deal, and that's a new beginning, and every bit is. And I've had, you know, authors where I haven't sold the proposal the first time round and worked on it and sold it the second time round. Same with novels. Sometimes you just don't sell the first thing at all, particularly with fiction. And then they just go, and you're like, well, I'm sending this out on submission now. You go, you know, you go away and start working on the next thing, or carry on working on the next thing, because waiting when you're out on submission is kind of like its own sort of torture.
It's horrific. I'm not going to
It's
lie. You know,
possibly the worst bit is, even you think it's bad sending stuff out to agents and not hearing. Just wait till you think you've got your book ready and it's going out to editors. It's just kind of even worse. And,
yeah, I'd
It's hard
agree.
for
I
agents.
think it's that thing, isn't
Yeah.
it, where agents are often advising writers to be realistic, and I think the points you've just made really sum that up. You know, there's so much that's still that culture of, but look at J.K. Rowling, you know, and that's just.
But she started out with a tiny deal. Like, our biggest earner at the agency, his first book deal was like $3,000 for 3 books, all right, sold kind of thing.
Yeah.
I won't tell you how much he's earning now, but it's a lot more than that.
Wow.
And he's selling incredible numbers of books, but that's been a 30-year career.
Yeah.
So, you know, there are overnight successes, and these are all the stories we hear about, right? Because they're the, like, exciting ones to read in the press. But 98% of authors are just plugging away, working hard, and agents are there to support you in
And
that.
part
So
of
you're
the
not
agent's
alone.
job is to keep everybody going, and to sort of, you know, and to sort of manage the expectations of the publisher and the author, to say, look, your first book might not sell loads, but if everybody is happy with what they've achieved at this level, then they'll carry on buying more books from you, and they'll build you. And you know, Ian Rankin's book that broke out, that made him a household name, was his 8th book. And it is really, really a long game, and it's, you know, and everything that you see and hear, it's in the press because it's news, and it's news because it doesn't happen very often. And it's really important to kind of, because actually otherwise you can feel very, and agents get this to feel like this too a lot of the time. I mean, we know, and we're constantly reminding ourselves of this, but we're like, oh my God, everyone's doing these massive deals all the time and selling all their authors on the first go. And like, I still think that in my head sometimes when I'm having a bad day, and I'm like, no, they're not. You know they're not.
Yeah, it just does not work like that. Yeah.
I mean, money's one of those things, isn't it? It's another thing that I wanted to raise in the panel. It's a massive thing to most working class people, as we know, because, you know, you can't always afford to go and do your MAs and your courses and your festivals, or, you know, there might be an agent day in London. This used to happen to me a lot. I live in Norfolk, so it takes me a couple of hours, 2.5 hours to get to London, and it's not cheap. So, you know, if you are in that fantastic scenario where you've got an agent saying, right, I want to meet you, can you come to London at 3 on Wednesday, but you live in Darlington and you've got 3 kids and childcare issues, I think that's changing, and I think it is becoming more accessible. But do you think that the way that we work now post-COVID as well, because we have Zoom, because we have, you know, other ways to meet people, is it going to continue, do you think, to be more accessible in that way? Sam, do you think so?
I think there's every reason why it should. I have a couple of clients that I've taken on this year that I haven't met in person yet.
Same.
One of which lives in Yorkshire and one of which lives in Ireland. So, but I don't feel that's been any obstacle to our relationship. So we email, we call, and yes, we have Zoom meetings and stuff. So we've seen each other's houses and we've chatted and we know each other's faces.
It's kind of more intimate than going to someone's office in a way, because you're kind of going, oh, they've just seen what books I've got behind me, or.
And maybe we've had more of those meetings because they're easier to set up than one of us flying to Ireland and back. And yeah, I think, you know, there haven't been many upsides to the pandemic, but I think in terms of how it has driven some new thinking and some innovative ideas and a real focus on accessibility for all different kinds of publishing events, actually, has been really positive. And the sense I get from colleagues in the publishing industry is that you know that there's been real value to that trend over the last year, and so I feel pretty confident that will continue, but perhaps in a mixed form. Like, there is a demand to have in-person events back and things, but perhaps with also a means in which people can participate from a distance.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's an absolutely brilliant one. So
I mean, I'd say also there's an increase in, like, if there are events, there's an increase in, you know, if agents have been invited to events and you know, people are going to be coming and pitching to them and that kind of thing, there's often opportunities for agencies to maybe sponsor a place and, you know, will you pay for that the £50 of the you know, to do that day and pay for the travel, and, you know, we do that at Charlie Campbell, and I think that, I mean, you know, I guess it's about making sure that those opportunities are advertised to authors, but and then I have lots of clients who do also, most of my clients still have a day job, and they're writing, but they're still not, you know, they're still not making an awful lot of money. There are lots of grants available to people for working on specific projects as well, and of course you have to apply for them, and it's hard, and they're not available. You know, there isn't one for everyone, but there are a few things, and I hope that those will increase. I think that's really important, so that people can actually.
And I think pay it forward schemes. Yeah. Kerry's a great one for this, isn't she? But those pay it forward schemes where people will sponsor places, and there are more kind of free festivals setting up. And I would urge anybody thinking of getting an agent to look out for those. There are more of them than you probably think. And agents are, as we're finding out, really approachable, nice people you can just go and chat to and ask questions. But actually, if we are in the dream scenario of an agent wanting to meet us, what should a writer be looking at and asking an agent?
When I meet someone, whether that's in person or on Zoom or have a call for the first time, I really go with my gut instinct, and I'd say the first thing to do is just do the same. You know, when you sit down with that person or when you chat to them on Zoom or whatever, are you getting on quite easily? Do you feel kind of intuitively that you can trust and respect them? Because they are going to be leading you through, first of all, the edits on your book, which is your baby. So come along and ask them what they want to do with the book, particularly if they haven't already given quite a thorough indication of that. Have a good chat about edits and what the editorial process is going to look like. I think it's also really reasonable to say things like, you know, which publishers do you anticipate picking this up? What do you think the rough timeline is going to be? Which is always a question that I slightly dread, so I don't know why I'm suggesting it. But
it's good to ask.
But, you know, I think it works. And I would do the same with my authors. So, for example, one of my authors is a teacher and only ever works on his books during half terms and holidays. So to edit his first novel took longer than I anticipated, because he was just like, I just have no headspace for this during term time, and I completely understood. But it means that, you know, he takes longer to write his books than some of my other authors who get up early and do it, or, you know, work at different times and all that kind of stuff. So I never underestimate that you're going to have to work around your day job and your kids or whatever else is going on in your life. So I think, ask about the publishers, ask about their colleagues. So we have an incredible kind of team of people at Bake Friedman, which means that everything around your book is kept in the agency. We have translation rights colleagues, so we have 2 brilliant agents who sell your book out in the translation market. So you might want to ask that agent, you know, what potential do you think my book has in the US or overseas? And it can be very hard to sell something particularly British. So for example, Kerry's Lowborn is only sold in France because she had a good readership there already, but that very British experience of having grown up in the way that she did is not going to necessarily translate into different countries. But if that's something you're curious about, ask about that. We also have film and TV department who sell our books into film production or TV production companies and that sort of thing. So you can also ask about kind of what are the other potential avenues for my book. And then we will always ask you, you know, what do you want to write next? Where do you want your career as an author to go? Kind of at the very base of it, what I want to hear from someone is not, I'm going to go and write a book about dragons and do science fiction after this, because that's not my thing at all. I'm kind of testing the water to see if they've got any next ideas, because also that's something quite exciting you can mention to editors when you submit the first book. You know, we've got a second in the works, so if you did want to offer for 2 books now, that might be something we could think about. But also if you do have career plans to head off in a different direction in a couple of books' time, that's absolutely fine, and like, be transparent about that, talk to us about that. I think the really key thing in a relationship between author and agent is good communication. So that when you send an email panicking because, you know, you can't get past a particular edit in your book, or you haven't heard from your publicist in 4 weeks or something, that you know your agent is going to be on the other end. And even if they can't reply within the hour, they are listening, and they will get back to you as soon as they can, you know, within the next couple of days, to put your mind at rest. And there's a lot of kind of just emotional support that agent offers too. And you know, it's fine to kind of have a wobble and bring it to your agent, because they're there to help you with it. So your publisher doesn't have to deal with it necessarily, or to take it to your publisher and just say, we hate that cover you've just come up with. Can you please, you know, revisit it, and, you know, have a reasoned conversation with your agent. So, you know, that's how you've got to trust them. You've got to trust them to be your best champion, and you're kind of really out there advocating for you. And I think, you know, that comes with that gut instinct, as I said. I certainly use it a lot to kind of try and read any potential divas who I don't want to be working with.
Exactly.
So I just have like a no high maintenance authors rule, which other agents do brilliantly with, but I'm just that, you know, I want calm, steady people I can trust, people who aren't going to write to their publisher and be like, what the F are you doing? But we'll bring that to me, and then I'll go to the publisher.
The difference between agents is, and you know, they are incredibly intuitive at pulling out creativity and seeing what is going to help produce an angle, a hook, an editor buy a book, but they're dealing with creatives who are of a different mindset and quite often of a different temperament, and that really kicks in Rejection, doesn't it? So let's just have a moment on Rejection, because it is inevitable, and you will do an awful lot of it. So Julia, you made a really interesting point earlier that I think helps address the balance between the sort of power feeling as if it's with agents and not with authors, that you get rejected too, and it's really important that people kind of remember, isn't it, that this is a business in which sometimes you are writing apples and an editor wants pears. So often we get asked to revise and resubmit. So can you just explain a little bit about that? Is that's slightly different to a rejection, isn't it? But it's not actually necessarily going to be an offer. It's a...
Yeah, it's so... There is a process of rejection. I have to say, sometimes as an agent, you have to be very, very careful, because in the last couple of years, I've submitted a memoir about grief and loss, and every rejection on that you have to handle very carefully with your author and talk them through it. And some authors don't want to see their rejections, some do. But as you said earlier with the submissions process, if you get any response, it's usually a little bit of feedback. You might get some encouragement. You know, we take that on board. And I think the good thing about having an agent is that you have someone to talk that through with. Yeah. So you have, you know, if an editor comes back and said, oh, I really like this, but I've got something too similar. Okay, so it's not for this imprint then, but is there anywhere else in that publisher I might be able to go? Because there are so many imprints these days where you can send books. So imprints are kind of the subdivisions of publishers. And if they say, you know, revise and resubmit, I'd say that was more common on non-fiction because it's about the angle being right for them sometimes. But on fiction, that's rarer, I think.
Okay.
So I don't often do that with a novel. Very occasionally you hear an editor sort of saying, really loved it, I'm just not quite convinced. So yeah, if you did a bit of work and came back on this or that and came back to me, maybe then I can take it to colleagues and get it through the hoops. But it's quite a big trust exercise there too. So your agent will say, well, you know, there's something they always say and it never follows through. Or they can say, yeah, you know what, let's sit down and look at this. If everyone else has said no as well. If there's a few other opportunities, let's hold on and wait for those. But yeah, your agent will make a judgment call on that because they know the person on the other end of the rejection too.
And sometimes it's reading, there's a lot of reading between the lines, isn't there?
Yeah.
Because, you know, you've got a relationship with that editor and they want to say something positive even if they're turning it down.
Yeah.
So they often are saying something positive, but they're not really necessarily going to be reconsidering it. And certainly as an agent, having submissions, you know, having things where I think they're really close, I probably a couple of times a year will say to someone who's submitted to me, you know, and I really like them and it's really close and I like them and I like their voice and I like what they're doing. I just don't feel like it's quite something that I can sell, or it's not quite hitting the mark. And I've had situations where they have revised and resubmitted to me and it's just still not quite right, and generally I will have had a chat with them as well, actually, just like over the phone. It's quite kind of, and then sometimes they send me another book later, and I've had situations where I've taken someone on after that.
I was going to say, yeah, next book.
Yeah,
then,
or they just end up with someone else, and actually then I'm pleased because I think, well, this person's great, and I kind of would have loved to have represented them because I think we would have had a good time working together, but it just wasn't quite right for me. And oh, look, it's connected even better with someone else, and they're going to get their book out there, and that's nice to see.
So it really is true, isn't it, on the end of the rejection letter when they put this is a business that's about opinions and it's very subjective, another agent might feel differently. But Sam, I want to ask you before, because we'll take some questions in a second, but what is an absolute turn off for an agent? What's pretty much guaranteed to kill it dead in the water?
Yeah, I think.
Is it bad grammar? Is it, you know?
Oh, you mean it's?
You really need me to be on your list.
I think arrogance comes off badly because it is a people business, and also it's such a close and important relationship. You know, I could be working with my clients, and I hope to for the next, say, 30 years, maybe 40 years, and it's very close. Some of my authors I talk to every week, sometimes more than that, and so yes, someone who thinks that their work is perfect and tells you that you're either a fool. And some people do this. They'll say, you know, it's very obvious that my book is a work of genius, and this is going to make your career. This is going to buy you your mansion, and it's going to sell as much as that. That is
Just
a big red flag.
Just send them my way, would you? Because I really want a mansion. Great.
And then it is best to be straightforward. I think it's in terms of willingness to do editorial work. I think maybe because I'm building my list at the moment, I have quite a lot of time for editorial work and I really enjoy it. And so I will offer representation to books where I really love the voice, I really love the emotional energy of the book, I really love the writing at a sentence level, but I think in terms of pacing or plot or structure, it's really it's going to require quite a lot more in order to sell. And so I will be very candid with that about the author. So then it becomes important to me how open they are. And if they say, actually, I see it as done, then that's a worry. Because I also know that would be a worry if an editor buys it. Because when an editor buys it, they'll also have edits. And so then the editor will come to me and be like, your author won't do any edits.
You couldn't tell them.
So yeah, kind of
So
collaborative
it's no
approach.
divas for Julia, no arrogance for Sam. And what's the biggest turn off for you, Julia?
Yeah, same.
Same. Really.
Both.
So, I mean, don't be a dick. I think
Yeah,
that's the
don't-
advice, really, there,
Exactly
isn't it?
that.
So, should we take a couple of questions if anybody's got a question that they'd like to ask? Gentlemen over there.
Quite your business ways, but what do you think of paying someone to read a manuscript or part of one? Sorry. It's the idea, what do you think of paying someone, an agency, for example, to read a manuscript or part of one in order
like an
to get a
editorial
response
service.
relatively quickly?
So I think it's completely up to you. I never say that people need to do that because I don't agree with anyone having to pay for access to the publishing industry, and you shouldn't need to pay for editorial work before you submit it, because that's what we do as well. We do that editorial work. But if that's something you want to do for your own peace of mind, absolutely fine. I think just go and, you know, make sure that you find someone reputable who's got a good kind of list of previous reads and published authors, to make sure that they are fair and they have some good people on board.
And I will say, if the business is calling itself a literary agency, but it's charging you upfront fees for reading,
Oh, yeah.
then be wary. That's a red
not a
flag.
literary agency,
Because a
yeah.
literary agency doesn't have that business model. We work purely on commission for deals we negotiate. So would be what Juliet says, a more kind of consultancy type business, which isn't then going to represent you. And
Yeah,
in the same
also
way an agent
anyone
would.
who says you need to pay for an introduction to an agency, that's complete bollocks. Like, you do not need to pay for any of us to talk to you. You just submit to us freely. So yeah.
Just that I did do it, and it was a very positive experience. So it was very helpful.
It's worthwhile.
I
I
would
think
just
it's-
add, sorry, Julia, I would just say that there are, if you are going to pay, then I probably wouldn't pay an agency. I would probably pay an editorial company, the
Yeah.
Literary Consultancy
Yeah.
or Jericho Writers, because they
That's
do
who it was.
use professionals. You know, I work for Jericho Writers, but I would not pay an agency, but I would pay a proper established
No,
company.
It was the literary consultancy.
Oh, they're
Yeah,
kosher.
that's
They're
fine.
completely
And
fine.
the person I chose is very good, and it
Yeah.
worked on the creative writing course at University of East Anglia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I
that
think
was-
that's the other thing, is look at who will be assessing your
Yeah.
work and make sure that they're going to get it. Because I've had a couple of authors and a couple of friends who've signed up to do writing courses and then been tutored by someone who's just not appropriate for their book.
I think
And I think that's
yeah.
something you can't possibly always think about before you
No.
sign up to
It was
these
work
things.
because you had a good choice,
Yeah.
of
Yeah, so
people to
pick
choose from. So I was able to
carefully.
choose well. But I just want to thank
I've
you.
definitely seen a lot of
Fantastic,
people
thank
being unhappy with certain courses where they're actually writing, and I mean, it's really difficult using these words commercial and literary, and there's lots of kind of nuance here, but some of the courses run by particular places are very focused on being literary, and actually a lot of very good, strong commercial writers have been put off by being treated a little bit as if what they were doing was less than, and that can be quite problematic. I mean, being completely honest, I do, I agree with Juliet. No one should have to pay. Certainly, no one should have to pay for access. And also, obviously, it puts you at an advantage if you can pay for editorial help before you go to agencies. But it's about sort of knowing what the options are. And I do have a client who I thought was really talented, and I just couldn't quite see my way into how to. So when they first submitted to me and I read their work, I literally said to them, I think there's a really good book in here trying to get out. But at that point I just couldn't quite see how, and I said, if you want to go that route, I could recommend, or I could suggest some people that you might want to have a chat with and see if you think they'd be the right person to work. And actually she did, and it was a really, really felicitous sort of relationship in the end, and it all worked out really well. And then, then she asked me to represent her, and we got
It sounds like it ended up being completely lovely.
But it sounds
Just
like then
happy.
and it is slightly controversial because some people might say, oh well, you managed, she kind of ended up paying money to be your client, but it's. I mean, everybody's got a different view on those things. It was a suggestion I made if that was something she wanted to do or could do, that was something she could do. It wasn't,
And I think it has to feel right with you, doesn't it? Instinctively, it has to feel
Yeah.
right to you. You have to have that level of trust that you're going to get something for the investment you're putting in, because so much of writing is investing time, your work, your heart and soul, because, whatever anybody says, whatever you write, it is a part of you. So, it's more than just a kind of a business and an exchange of money. So that's a really good question. Thank you. And anybody else got any questions? Lady at the back with the glasses.
Hello. So I've heard some horror stories about agents kind of coercing an author into shaping a novel into something that is different from their initial vision for it, and kind of so how, as a writer, how do you know that the agent's vision for the book kind of aligns with your own and prevent that like straying into another direction where it's like...
I'm going to start to answer this one myself because it actually happened to me. About 10, 15 years ago, I got picked off a slush pile by a massive agent, mentioning no names, and I'm very grateful for her time. I'm just going to say that now. But we didn't sign, even though I said, well, should we? And she said, let's wait a year, it might take edits, but took it on an exclusive basis. So I had 6 interested agents, and I chose, because I was awestruck by how massive she was, to go with her. And we worked for 2 years on my book. And the 3rd draft of that felt like pulling teeth. And the one thing I would say to you is never, ever be writing when it feels like pulling teeth, because it meant that what was happening was I was trying to please the agent. And you can't write like that. You have to take on board suggestions from a good agent, because they're trying to help you. They're trying to make you more saleable and progress your career. But at the end of the day, you are the writer, and if you're writing something that you don't feel is true to what you started writing, it will reflect in your book. And after 2 years of working with her and 2.5 years of writing the book before I worked with her, she changed her mind. And it almost stopped me writing. It took me a long time to write again. So I don't know if you would feel the same.
I would say that if an agent's asking you to do that much and not signing you, that's a warning sign. I mean, I know all the agents here, and I do a lot of editorial work. I mean, the client I mentioned earlier was a particular circumstance where I couldn't quite see my way in at that point. But generally, you know, Juliet's talked a lot about working for a year with somebody on something before they send it out, and then and the risk is on everybody. And we often send things out and they don't sell. But you know, if somebody wants to do, maybe, you know, if they're asking you to revise and resubmit and they've put a lot into it, and you're talking about an exclusive for a month or 2, but not for that length of time, that wouldn't be acceptable at all. They should be signing you and committing to do that editorial process with you.
Yeah, I think you should be showing the agency agreement letter from the start.
Yes, no, absolutely. And I always send mine out. If I'm offering someone representation, I say, take your time. If you're talking to other people, that's absolutely fine. Here is our agreement, which shows the obligations we have to you and you to us. This is what it looks like. Let me know if you've got any questions.
And then you know where you stand. It will, for example, outline the notice you would need to give if you decide it's not working for you, and the basis for that, and what would happen afterwards, and stuff, which, as an author, is really important for you to know.
There are horror stories, and I would agree. I mean, I know them. I know a lot of writers. I've heard an awful lot of things. Some of them have been really horrible, and my experience, the word I would use is brutal. That's what it felt like. It felt like being eviscerated, and it completely trashed my confidence. But the one thing I would say that we all say after doing it for quite a long time is trust your instinct. You have an instinct for a reason, and it's telling you something if you're getting that kind of off-kilter feeling, and you're going down roads that don't feel right. Just don't get to the pulling teeth stage would be my biggest advice. Don't be so in awe of an agent that if somebody's been interested in your work, chances are other agents will be interested in your work. So trust your gut, I would say, and don't listen to too many horror stories, because they are.
So if an agent gives you a load of edits that they want you to do, can you say, no, I don't agree with that edit, so I'm not going to do that?
Absolutely. You can say that all the way through the process. And, you know, as I said, when you first meet an agent or you first have that conversation about working together, try and have as much of that discussion there as you can, because I think that is still so much part of the decision-making process. And if they are saying, well, I really want to pull it in this direction, and that doesn't make sense to you, first of all, ask, you know, why do you want to go down there, and what's it going to do for the book? But I think absolutely trust your instincts. Like, what is the story you want to put out into the world? And is that agent going to support you in that and enhance that story, or are they pulling in a different direction and it's going to end up somewhere you don't want to be? Because I think, you know, as well as agents, there's lots of questions about writing for the market. Should I write for the market? And as agents, we cannot contrive books for the market, because the market changes all the time. Like, who saw the pandemic coming? And who knew that everyone might want cosy escapist reads now, and, you know, the Richard Osmans of this world to do their cosy crime and stuff? No one knew that was coming. So we don't kind of drag a book towards the market in that sense. And if anyone's trying to do that, I think, question them about it. And I always say that edits are a conversation. They are not me to present to you and you to just get on with it, like you have to do it like it's homework. It's a discussion, you know, and it's exactly the same with your editor. Your editor should not be presenting you with a ton of notes and being like, right, I'll see you on the other side. They should be saying, read through it, let's have a call about it, let's talk about it. You know, I just had an author read his novel for the 13th time since we sold it to the publisher, and he was like, I'm so sick of this book now.
You will
but
be stuck
at that
with it,
last
yeah.
stage, he was still like, actually, I don't want that word changed, and I don't want that word changed, and that's okay. You know, the author has the ultimate right to say, no, I don't want that to happen to my book. So hold fast to that. I think.
Yeah, again, I think it goes back to confidence, doesn't it? To coming
Yeah,
from a
yeah,
working class
I get
background
it.
where we're routinely told that our stories and lives don't really matter and aren't of interest. So it's very hard to have that confidence and to not be in awe. Really don't be in awe. I hope today it's helped people see, you know,
Yeah,
agents
please
are
don't.
just people, you know.
And I think if someone is telling you that they don't think your story can tell, or they don't think your story is relevant, or whatever, that is really, honestly, one opinion.
Totally. So we started a bit later, so I'm happy to take some more. I know there was a lady over here who had a question. Hard to talk with masks on, isn't it? Yeah.
I just wanted to ask a question about memoir in particular, and what you expect from a submission for memoir, because I think I've written my memoir in a strange way in that I finished it, and often with non-fiction I think you wouldn't finish it, you'd just write a proposal, and now I'm kind of at a point where I'm like, do I submit it like it's fiction or not like it's fiction, or like do I submit a proposal and just, I don't know if you have any
I think if you've
suggestions.
written it, it's absolutely fine to submit it in the way you would a novel. So a proposal is usually a kind of longer synopsis, maybe up to 500 words, a chapter plan that's quite thorough, so it has kind of paragraph under each chapter explaining what it does, and then 2 sample chapters. So you've already got the sample chapters, so that's fine. So I would send it with a synopsis and the first 3 chapters, 10,000 words, whatever that looks like. And then kind of other considerations when you're writing a memoir. I think it's a very, very busy area of publishing. There is so much memoir being published, so be very clear about what makes your story different. And that might be the way you've told it, that might be your experience. You know, when I'm selling memoir, I'm trying to find a very distinct space for it, so it will really help me to kind of get on board with it from the outset if you can see a little bit of what that is as well. And then using other comparisons, so in your submission letters in general, to use a couple of points of comparison is really helpful. So like that Bridget Jones and Downton Abbey thing, if you've got a couple of comparative books that you think your memoir might sit alongside, really helpful to use those to pitch your memoir as well. In some cases, non-fiction needs quite a big platform to get published. In memoir, that's not such an issue because it's usually much more about the writing and the lived experience there. But if you are writing about a particular issue, say you were writing about nature, or so one of my memoir writers is writing about baby loss, and she's already got a big platform online kind of talking about it, and has had some journalism published and stuff like that. So if you've got those kinds of things, they can be real assets. But it's not the end of the world if you don't have them. Just note them in your cover letter if that's what you've got there.
And would you still expect like a synopsis with a memoir or not?
Yes, I think so, because I mean there would be a synopsis in the proposal, and we'd still want to know kind of where you start, where you end, what happens between those 2 points. So the kind of development of the story and that main narrative thread is really important to a memoir as well, just as it is in a novel. So yeah, synopsis is good. Sorry about that.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Gentleman at the front. I know we are, it seems like we're running over a bit, but we did start a little bit later. So
Thanks.
I think
just,
we're allowed.
Sorry, just a quick clarity on you were saying about mentioning other works in a cover letter. Is that just general? If you got previous stuff or you're working on something, would you mention it in a cover letter? I just wanted to check.
Yeah, so if you've had anything published, of course mention that. If you've had short stories published or done well in competitions, or you know, Brit Prize or Bristol Short Story Prize, mention that too. If you're writing non-fiction, particularly you've got journalism published or essays or something like that, any kind of other platform that's hosted your writing in some way, it's great to mention it. I think if you to be completely honest, if you've written 7 other novels and not got any there with them, don't mention that because it's just a bit like, okay, well, what's this different about this one? So I think, keep your powder dry in that respect if it's all unpublished work. But it's fine to say I'm already working on my next novel, particularly if you're writing, say, for example, a crime series. You might be like, I've got my plan for the 2nd and 3rd books there, or you might just want to say a little bit about your next idea, so that's fine too. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks.
And there was one, I will take one, there was somebody who that was your question. So one last question.
It's just I'm writing a non-fiction, maybe it's memoir proposal, and I know what it's about, but I also don't know what it's about. I feel like I need to write it to know more what it's about, so I'm really hesitant to submit it and get rejected because it might. Do you know what I mean?
I think you should go with your instinct on that. So I've had quite a few clients writing memoir in the last couple of years, and in most cases I've gone out with they've presented to me and I have gone out with a proposal and an outline and some sample material, but in one case I made them write the whole thing just because I knew it's going to be quite hard to sell because it's quite a taboo subject, but she's a brilliant writer, and I also felt like she hadn't quite worked out what the sort of thread running through it was, what was going to keep it all together, and so she did write the whole thing, and actually I still sent it out on proposal because I think sometimes for editors as well it's easier for them to have less to read almost, and we then created a really solid sort of outline around what she'd already done, so it's like kind of, I don't know, retrofitting something, or and so in the end the editor who bought it, I did send the whole thing to them. There were a couple of editors who were like, actually I'd really like to take this further. I said, well, do you want to read the whole thing because we've got it, and I think sometimes all agents will probably say the same thing, that we sort of respond to the situation, and there isn't always a set kind of way of doing things because there's no manual.
So I guess my question is it safe to send you something that and should I articulate that?
I think you should know what you want to say first, and it's going to be confusing for us if it's confusing for you, if that makes sense. If you as the author are not yet sure what your book's about, how are we going to understand kind of quite what it is or where we should be positioning it or anything? So I would, there's no rush, take your time, land on something that makes sense to you about what you want to write.
I suppose more what I'm thinking is if it slightly changes, how exact does it have to be? It's not that it's completely changing. It's just that perfect articulation. I'm worrying about, how exact does it have to be, and
it can evolve. I think that's fine. I think you need to just be clear about what you want to do with it and what you want to write, and then all non-fiction books that are sold on proposal evolve in the writing process, because that author suddenly is not just them sitting down writing a book. They've got their agent and their editor chiming in if they want that. They've got feedback along the way, and we're helping you to steer it. So it's never a given that the proposal will be exactly the finished book. It can evolve during the writing process, and we might say, well, here's a really interesting unanticipated strand that you've started. Why don't you try bringing that in more?
That's exactly
so
that's what I meant. Yeah,
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Well, I'm going to ask the agents one last quick question, a really quick summing up, as I quite like these questions. But what's the best piece of advice that you could give any writer, very succinctly and quickly?
I think trust your instincts is quite a takeaway.
Trust your instincts. We like that.
Keep persevering.
Keep persevering. That's, I would say, absolutely.
Keep persevering and really have the expectation that there's going to be a lot of rejection, because actually I think with each rejection it almost becomes easier.
Yeah.
It's so baked into everything that you just need to kind of become a bit of a sponge for it, I think.
You need to be resilient. Mine would be, don't be a dick. When you're applying to agents, don't be a dick. Just be, don't try to be something that you're not. Just be you. You is usually quite good. So before we go, I'm just going to point out that it will be, or is, a QR code that will show up, that if you could just do, and you will be sent an email, it's just for the survey, for the feedback, for the festival, for the sponsors. So do, if you can, spare the time, give a little bit of feedback to help Natasha and the sponsors so we can do all of this again next year. And I'd like to thank Juliet Pickering and Sam Hodder and Julia Silk for being brilliant agents who are totally human. We're loving that. And thank you for coming. Oh, it's a bit late. We start late.